How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your September 2019 horoscope for Sagittarius, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. We are starting September off with Mars conjoining the Sun in Virgo. Now, Mars is the planet of our action and our drive and where we energize ourselves. And while it's in the sign of Virgo, this is focused on the specific tasks and the minuscule and kind of detailing and focusing in where your energy is being output. Now, Mars is a malefic planet, so it heats up, it's dry, it cuts, it severs. It brings some problems like anger and frustration. So while Mars has been in Virgo, you could have been frustrated with those things, especially because it's in your 10th house of career. You could be dealing with issues like that within your career place. Now, as Mars conjoins the Sun, though, this is when Mars is kind of, in essence, getting purified by fire, getting put into the light, where Mars can kind of get a renewed sense of energy and a fresh directive or a fresh perspective on where it wants to direct its energy at. And with this happening in your 10th house, which we're going to be talking a lot about your 10th house today, with ruling your career, public image, how people see you, kind of like your vocation in life. There's going to be a lot of, it seems like there's a renewed sense of energy here with what you're doing with your career. Then on September 3rd, Mercury conjoins the Sun in Virgo, and this is a little bit more important because Mercury's ruling sign is Virgo, and that's its home domain. So we have Mercury now, the planet of communication, our ideas and thoughts and how we vocalize those things, in its home sign where, it's a little bit more concise, it's a little bit more clear, we're focused on the black and whites. Mercury is, combust and underneath the beams of the sun for the majority of this month, so there may be a little bit of uncertainty there. But on September 3rd, as Mercury conjoins the Sun, this is the same idea where it's kind of getting put into the spotlight, kind of getting refreshed with some energy, and this is going to be a time where we went from, having that Mars conjunction to the Sun and being clear and direct with where we're wanting to pursue. With Mercury now being conjoining the Sun, this is more of where we get the thought, the kind of like the light bulb in your head to kind of go, oh, this is the idea that I want. This is making more sense to not only my thoughts, to it's making sense in my communication, it's making sense in words. And this is where, if you're wanting to do more within your career, within that 10th house topic, this is a good time to get a little bit more organized, a little bit more efficient, and a lot more clear on your perspective. Then from September 4th, 7th, and 10th is when we're going to have Venus oppose Neptune, Mercury oppose Neptune, and the Sun oppose Neptune. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, and I wanted to condense it into one thing with all three of these transits since they're all kind of happening back to back. Neptune is that planet of confusion, of fog, of mysticism and illusion and duality, yet it holds a space for our dreams and for our imaginations to take over and interpret more of our experience of what's going on. And as Venus is in your 10th house now because it's in Virgo, Venus, the planet of value, love, connection, bringing things together, she's in her sign of fall, meaning she's kind of struggling doing all of that. Venus wants to beautify the perspectives and the small details that Virgo's kind of giving to her. However, Venus can get a little bit overwhelmed with all of the specifics and can't exactly put all of her love and interest into every single tiny one. So while Venus makes her opposition to Neptune, I think this is getting a little bit more clear about where we do need to put our value in when it comes to the specifics, because we can't, we could write a huge to-do list with 10,000 points, but unless we can accomplish it that day, there's no need to actually write it down on that list. So Venus opposing Neptune is kind of like seeing a little bit more past what is foggy and blurry, although Neptune I consider a malefic planet. So this also is a time where you're going to be caught up a little bit in some confusion and some fog. And this is happening in your 4th house where Neptune is, where you live, where you center yourself, your home, your private life. And with Venus being in your 10th house of career, it's kind of like, where is there a shadow or an illusion or maybe something that's not clear all the way in your living situation. However, doing your work, doing what you're focused on in your career and placing your value more in the specifics that you do know may bring you some more clarity on that situation. So after we have that value switch of kind of like these things are more important than the others, Mercury makes its opposition to Neptune, where the mentality and the mindset starts to make a switch. And now that Mercury is in Virgo, it's in its home sign where it's working really well. Mercury can now kind of see and pierce through a little bit of that veil that Neptune has. And this is where we start to make, more critical decisions, or making, using our critical thinking skills to kind of get past what is blurry, what doesn't really make sense, and what is confusing, and focus more on what can you do on the bigger picture mentally to kind of, figure out where you need to focus. And that sounds a little arbitrary, but the one thing I wanted to hit about these aspects is that while Mercury, Venus, and the Sun are all in your 10th house, they're exposed, they're up in the air, you can see what's going on with them. Neptune is in your 4th house at the bottom of your chart, where it can be a little bit harder to see, and so it may be easier for you to take actions for stuff that is, that you can see, that you're aware of, that will work, versus trusting something that isn't necessarily extremely clear. And I think while Mercury opposes Neptune, that's going to be the time where you start to really see which facts are clear and that you can rely on, and which, truths or whatever aren't necessarily reliable. So then after we have that value shift with Venus, that Mercury shift that mental shift with Mercury, then the Sun opposes Neptune, and this is when Earth is as close to Neptune as we get in our orbit around the Sun. And the Sun opposing Neptune is kind of like turning on your brights when you're driving through fog. It doesn't really work that well for seeing past it. However, with the Sun opposing Neptune, I think this is more about seeing the experience of that mental shift and that value shift, and seeing how that's going to play out. With all of this opposing Neptune, this is not to say that everything's going to get cleared up and be perfect and black and white. However, as we're focusing, or we're shifting our focus to things that are black and white, to things that are tangible, and we're willing to change within that, that's all that Virgo stuff. As the Sun opposes Neptune, this is kind of like a time of, well, let's use the light where we can see it. And you turn on your fog lights, and it lights up the ground underneath to where you could see the reflectors on the street rather than focusing on the road ahead of you. And using your fog lights, putting light onto something that you can actually use to see is going to help you kind of get a little bit farther, especially when it comes to things that you're trying to accomplish within your career, and also kind of getting the shadow away from any situation that's going on in your home life. Then on September 13th is when Mercury conjoins Venus in Virgo, and this is quite lovely because while Venus is in her fall, she's struggling here, Mercury's kind of coming to her rescue to kind of handle all of the minuscule tiny details that she can kind of get overwhelmed with. And Mercury right here is also kind of projecting the voice of Venus, where Venus is in Virgo saying, you know what, I like these things in this certain order, in this way. I'm willing to adapt and to change as long as they're tangible, they're realistic, and it makes sense. This is in your 10th house of your career, so Venus is trying to get some specifics covered. And as Mercury conjoins it, it's kind of like emphasizing more of the beauty and emphasizing more of the value in the receiving of those specific details that you're interested in. And with Mercury right here being so cognitively aware and, also just mentally prepared and can handle it, this is kind of getting organized with those feelings and organized with those thoughts and kind of prepared and better organized with what you're doing with your job. But also on September 13th is when we have the full moon in Pisces. Now, while Mercury is conjoining Venus in your 10th house, and there's some understanding, there's some communication and some awareness around the value that's being focused in on in your career, this full moon in Pisces is happening in your 4th house. A full moon is where you have both of the luminaries lighting up an axis and kind of giving you a full perspective of your chart. Now, the sign of Pisces is kind of like about mixing emotions with logic and blending it all together. There's no boundaries or rule book on how exactly to do it. It's about what do you make of it? What is your experience of it? And as this is happening in your 4th house, I think having Mercury conjoining Venus in your 10th, giving you some clarity and some perspective on your career, is going to open up opportunities for experiences that you can have in your 4th house. Then the next day on September 14th, while Mercury and Venus are still conjunct, they will be both simultaneously ingressing into Libra and moving from your 10th house to your 11th house. Now, this is pretty important because Venus is going from her sign of fall to her home sign, her domicile, where Venus can do Venus things in the most Venusian way possible. And this is Venus, love, value, connection, bringing people together. And this is the sign of Libra, of balance, social relationships, one-on-one relationships. Like I like to look at Libra as kind of like, you know, the relationship that you have with an individual in the context of kind of any given society moment of like running into someone at the store and having a conversation. There's certain rules to the game. However, there's a certain charming elegance that you kind of like, you know, share with someone there. And as Venus is going into her home sign where those type of qualities are, you know, saturated a little bit more, this is going to be reflected in your 11th house of friends, of communities, of bigger groups of people. And so while Venus goes into Libra into your 11th house, this is going to be a time of valuing your connection with your friendships more, being able to enjoy the spirit and indulge in those friendships. But also, Mercury is moving into Libra, where Mercury is going from its domicile sign to, it doesn't really have an opinion on Libra per se. But as Mercury goes into Libra, this is still where our thoughts and our the way that we vocalize those, our the way that we think, the way that we communicate, is also being processed through that Venus and Libra lens of where can we find more harmony and work on building more bridges with the relationships that we have in our friend groups or in our community. Also on September 14th is when Mars opposes Neptune. And this is pretty important because as Mars is in Virgo, you know, still combust, still kind of like wanting to be direct and specific, but it's kind of getting a little bit too hot to focus. As Mars opposes Neptune, this is where we can kind of dial it in a little bit clearer on where we need to be addressing our energy. You know, we had that value shift with Venus, that mental shift with Mercury. We were able to see it in practice as the Sun opposed Neptune. Now as Mars opposed Neptune, now we could start taking more assertive action and being more decisive with where we are placing our energy. And for you, that is where you're placing your energy within your career. You know, this is Mars, this is a malefic planet, so if you're dealing with anger and frustrations there, I think this is a big time to look at what's, you know, actually the problem and what's not the problem and where you're going to be directing your energy at now. Then on September 18th, Saturn finally stations direct, and this is really awesome for you guys as a Sag rising. Saturn's been retrograde for the past couple months, and as it's been retrograde, it's been handing us more duties, more responsibilities, and kind of blocking us in from wanting to go or grow anywhere. Now, as Saturn stations direct, this is the time where we take the lessons that we learned during that time of adversity and trials and tribulations and actually apply what we've learned into real life experiences by taking, you know, more of a disciplined approach, a more mature, a more wiser approach to things. And this is Saturn, you know, this is about rules, this is about discipline, this is about, you know, like systematic behavior. And as Saturn stationing direct, it's happening in your second house of your money, of your personal finances, the money that you have, your valuables, the physical items that you actually possess. And as Saturn stations direct, again, this is about taking all that, you know, Saturn retrograde stuff of, you know, maybe there was some limitations around what you were making or around your income or around what was going on there. Saturn stationing direct is kind of like, all right, now we can actually start applying what we've learned and actually start moving forward in a more comfortable area if we just discipline ourselves and kind of learn the way of Saturn in the second house. Then on September 21st is when Jupiter squares Neptune for the third and final time. Now this transit has been happening for the majority of the year, and for you guys this might be a little bit more specific for you because you're a Sag rising and have Jupiter in your first house and are ruled by Jupiter. But Jupiter is now direct and moving forward, and it's in the superior square to Neptune while Neptune's in Jupiter's sign. A lot of this, you know, that's basically to say that Jupiter here, while it's in your first house and you're wanting to expand yourself, you're wanting to expand your ideas, your personality, your sense of self, and who you are and what you do, Jupiter is finally overcoming the shadow illusion of fear and what possibly could be. And Jupiter's kind of like, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to trust myself and I'm going to remain faithful in my own capabilities to get over this fear of the unknown. That's really what Neptune is. And especially because Neptune's in your fourth house, the fourth house is where you center yourself. It can be hard to go on this adventure, on this journey with Jupiter when you're unsure of where you're stable at. And I think Jupiter making that third and final square is kind of like the truth prevailing over the things that are not, that don't make sense, the things that are illusionary, the things that are confusing and blurry. Then on September 23rd, the sun moves from Virgo into Libra. Fall begins, and as the sun moves into Libra, it moves into your 11th house of friendships, communities, bigger groups of people. And this is just where the spotlight is. The sun is what gives us life here on Earth. And as the sun moves from that 10th house area of kind of bringing the light and the attention and focus on the career topics, this gets imported into your 11th house of friends. And the 11th house can still kind of have importations of career, things. But, like, who do you hang out with outside of work, or what work friends do you have, or do you have to go to a company party or something like that? Those can be themes as well, but as the sun moves into Libra, this is, again, just where the focus gets brought onto that area. Then on September 25th, we have Venus square Saturn, and I bring up this transit because it's usually pretty rough, but I find this one interesting because we have Saturn in its domicile sign of Capricorn, and we have Venus in her domicile sign of Libra. Venus, however, is in the superior position here as she's in the sign of Libra and at the top. And as Venus is applying to a square with Saturn, I think this comes down to your value of connection with friends and going out, connecting with people. Where is that getting in the way of your expenses and your income? And where do you need to be more strict and have more self-discipline around where exactly you're investing your money when it comes to the influence that you have over your social sphere? Because I think as Venus squares Saturn, where you're finding yourself, as Venus is in Libra, as you're finding yourself more out with friends, more connecting with other people, that's going to end up putting a problem within your finances, so it's going to be important to kind of delegate the two. And then we end September with the new moon in Libra happening on September 28th, and this is in that 11th house of friendships. And I think that this is going to be positive because as Venus is up in here bringing value, Mercury's here where your mind's already focused on this area. This new moon is where both the luminaries are focused in on one point, and it's giving you the time to reset your intentions, kind of get your head a little bit leveled here, and maybe put some more time and some more, compassion into your friendships, and maybe give in a different way, necessarily that isn't so Venusian, that's a little bit more solar and lunar in the sense of, hey, you can be a friend and still be a good friend. You don't always have to do all of the Venus things, since this new moon is squaring Saturn. There's going to be some restrictions that you'll find here. But that's how we're ending September, guys. So thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next month.